Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. We are honored to have with us Julie Brown, who was the investigative reporter, is the investigative reporter for the Miami Herald, who has revealed so much about the Jeffrey Epstein scandal and also the book Perversion, the Jeffrey Epstein story. Welcome, Julie. Thank you for everything that you've done on this really atrocious crime.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about Maxwell, who is now sitting in jail, has had this very bizarre visit, frankly, from Todd Blanche. What was her role with Jeffrey Epstein? What did she do and what was she convicted of?
You know, she has been convicted of sex trafficking a minor, but beyond that, she's been accused of trafficking many girls. She is considered by the victims to be really the mastermind behind Epstein's pyramid scheme. She created this pattern where when he was living in Palm Beach, she would travel to spas and gyms throughout the area, find pretty girls, give them her business card, really bubbly, sweet, saying, you know, we have this wealthy man. He wants to hire you as his personal masseuse. You could travel the world, make lots of money. And so these girls thought, yeah, I'll contact you. And this is how it started. They would come and he would, they would be ushered up to his bathroom, his area where his shower and his bedroom were. It was like a suite. And he would come in only a towel. And they're thinking that they're there just to give him a massage. And in many cases, Maxwell was with him and started instructing the girls on how to pleasure him, not only with the massage, but sexually. And according to some of the testimony that was in court, she actually got them to take off their clothes, started doing things to them. So she was directly involved. She wasn't just a recruiter. She, in some cases, was directly involved in coaxing and grooming these girls.
How many girls total do we think were involved in this? Underage girls, do we think were involved?
It's hard to know. We know that there were about 60 that I was able to identify with my investigation that I did, underage girls, but there were probably plenty more. We know that there was over 200 victims who applied for compensation from Epstein's estate. There's probably hundreds, at least 100 or more.
Right. We had this very bizarre sequence of events where he got the most mild, you can call it a slap on the wrist. But thanks to Alex Acosta, who was the U.S. attorney at the time, he got months in prison and then was released. But as part of that, there was a certain agreement about other people involved. And Maxwell, who was subsequently indicted, subsequently convicted, is now saying that that deal really prohibited her from being prosecuted. Can you talk about what the agreement was and whether there's really any basis for her to now invoke that as a shield in her own conviction?
Right. Well, it was a very interesting sort of codicil to this sweetheart deal, which, by the way, was done in secret, and it was sealed for at least a year before the victims or anybody really knew what the deal was. They only knew that that he pled guilty to some minor charge of solicitation of a minor. And so this deal, when it finally was unsealed, it included this strange codicil that said that that it would grant immunity as well to all his co-conspirators, both named and unnamed. So there were four that were named. None of them were Maxwell. But there has always been a lot of speculation about what that other second part means, unnamed. And as I understand it from talking to lawyers over the years now, they've never seen anything like it. This is a very unusual And they wonder how enforceable really is something like this. So it's new, and it's exactly what she's using as part of her appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. As I understand it from experts, there has been a divided when similar things have happened along these lines. The courts have been divided thus far on whether this would be enforceable. So we're just gonna have to wait and see if she's able to do that based on that codicil. But uh, you know, really, he probably was trying to cover her. She
Yes,
By the time she had get out of the picture, so she wasn't directly involved. He had set up. She helped him set up a whole system for him to obtain underage girls. So it got to the point where he didn't really need her because he had hired assistants to help him.
right.
So she had stepped out, went back to New York, and so when Palm Beach police started investigating this, she wasn't at in Palm Beach any longer. So she was not part of the Palm Beach police investigation. So so it'll be interesting to see whether the US Supreme Court is going to look at this.
Got it. Now, President Trump has had a whole variety of things. The most recent, as he said, was that he split with Jeffrey Epstein. This is, I think, the third story that he's given because he stole someone who belonged to him. Tell us about that sequence and whether the timeline that you understand for a falling out with Jeffrey Epstein matches what Trump says occurred.
Well, I probably have a little bit different view of it than has been expressed in other media because um, we know that that Epstein and Trump were friends at least into the 2000s, okay, and
Yes.
beyond when you know um, Virginia Giuffre was working for him in the year 2000 when he was still friends with Epstein.
Yes.
And it was actually Maxwell that recruited him. I know he said that Epstein stole her, but he didn't. I mean, yes, ultimately he did, but it was Maxwell who was at
Right.
Mar-a-Lago that took her. And it's ironic that now his Justice Department is trying to negotiate something with her. But and then Epstein wasn't made under investigation until 2005. And we're not exactly sure the dates that they had their falling out, but it was all happening around the same time he was friends with Epstein, okay?
Got it.
But my guess is he probably didn't even know who Virginia Giuffre was until she went public in 2015. You know,
Right.
she so by then he really wasn't friends with Epstein. So this idea that somehow he's contradicted himself, how could he still be friends when he knew that he was stolen? I'm sorry, when Trump now says he was stealing his employees, I don't think that that means that he knows he knew that Virginia even existed at that
Right.
time. And also the phrase he stole her is a bit troubling. She's a human being. She was an underage girl. She was 16 years old. I don't know if you can refer to her as sort of like a piece of property. So there's a couple of different things going on here. And this is a story that he's never told before. So
Right.
I don't really understand the point of referring to her as a piece of property that was stolen
And
from him.
she, of course, tragically committed suicide. And just to remind us of the human damage, the trail of destruction that is left by this, it does seem peculiar because that would seem to make it worse. Have you seen evidence that Donald Trump knew that Epstein slash uh, Maxwell were taking his employees, in other words, soliciting employees from Mar-a-Lago? Aside from this latest comment, do,
No,
do we know that he knew what was going on? It seems that
no.
he was not exactly aware of like the little people, if you will, who had employment there.
No, and she was a summer intern. She
Right.
got the job at the spa for through her father, who was like a groundskeeper, I believe, at Mar-a-Lago. So
Yes.
he didn't know anything about her until the
Mm.
story became a big story, in the mid 2000s. So this whole line of Epstein stealing employees is like I said, I've never heard this line before. We've heard that he had a falling out over a real estate deal, and we were told that there was a falling out over Epstein hitting on a young girl who was the daughter of one of the other Mar-a-Lago club members.
Correct. And as to that story, do we have contemporary information that he was upset about that he knew about that episode in which there was a solicitation of a young lady?
No, I got that from one of the lawyers who represented the victims who had spoken with Trump
Got it.
when he was investigating what had happened, and that's what he said. Trump told him that it had to do with that. So we don't have any. It's also suspect at this point. That story might be suspect because
Yes.
Trump could say anything. I mean, we don't really know. And he does have a history of stretching the truth. And so we really don't know. And with this story now changing to some degree, it sort of makes you wonder whether the other stories were accurate or not. I do think that they ran into some friction, the two of them, because uh, Epstein fancied himself as being an intellectual and a very, smart.
Sophisticated.
He was very smart. He wasn't a dumb
Yes.
man, but yes, sophisticated is a good word, and he did not consider Trump to be very sophisticated. So I don't think that they were that kind of pals, except that they ran in the same social circle.
Got it. Now, much of what we know about Donald Trump comes from your investigation and from materials that have been in the public domain for a while. Now, there's this search for a customer list, as if there is some place on a single piece of paper that might say, this guy had sex with this person. What we do have, and what's been out there for years now, is a phone directory. Explain what that is and whether, to your knowledge, there is a specific list of people who you could identify as having sex with underage girls.
Well, at Maxwell's criminal trial, one of the housemen, the butlers or whatever you want to call it, who worked in Epstein's home in Palm Beach, testified that this was a list of people similar to an old-fashioned Rolodex file that Maxwell actually would compile and update. Maxwell was the social butterfly here. Epstein actually didn't socialize in big groups. His social circle was a lot smaller. He used her as Maxwell as entree to the most powerful people. And she was the one that compiled that list. And so it's hard to know, Epstein's involvement in this. But the one thing that came up was one of his later housemen went to one of the lawyers in the case, and this was well after Epstein served his light jail sentence, was released, went back to his jet setting life. A number of lawsuits were filed against Epstein by his victims, and what happened is one of the people that worked for Epstein tried to monetize this list by giving it to one of the lawyers who was mounting a case against Epstein. And when he met with those lawyers in order to get money, here, I'm going to give you the list, you give me the money. He circled some names in there, and what he said, and we don't know if this is true. The guy is now dead, of course. These are the people that know about Epstein's crimes, or what Epstein is doing with these girls. And one of the people that was circled was Trump. And subsequently, He was arrested. The man that tried to monetize this was arrested, sent to Florida prison, and died. So we don't know. I mean, this is just a guy who was trying to make money. So who knows? But in any event, uh, this is this is part of the intrigue of this case. You know, people die. It's just bizarre how this story has evolved.
Absolutely. Now, we do know that Trump was on Epstein's plane. Where did he go on the plane?
He mostly went back and forth between Palm Beach, New York, those kind of places. They didn't go on any trips together.
Okay. So he of late said he was never to Epstein's island, home, compound, whatever you want to call it. Do we know if that is the case? Do we know if that's true?
No, we don't know whether it's true or not. We
Okay.
don't.
So in all of this, obviously because he's president of the United States, because he controls in large part the documents, at least that are held within the federal government, the focus has been on him. But obviously, there are many, many men who were involved in many aspects of this. And what do we know about them? What do we know if they have been involved in any litigation? Tell us about kind of the universe of the rich and powerful who frankly have avoided detection at this point, avoided any kind of consequence for their behavior.
Well, let me start by saying that there's no evidence implicating Trump or any of
Correct.
the men really in these crimes, and that's part of the frustration of the victims because
Yes.
they feel that the FBI and the DOJ never really pursued that. And I do know from my sources that they were focused, the lawyers were focused, the FBI was focused, the DOJ was focused solely on bringing Epstein to justice. In other words, when the other names of other people, of other men that were involved, they didn't care about that. They just wanted to nail Epstein and then later Maxwell. So most of the evidence that they have really doesn't, there might be some names in there that they gathered in some way or another. Epstein had his own files on some of these people he did business with. So it's hard to know exactly what they have beyond that. But my sources tell me they didn't really go there. Once they arrested Epstein, uh, you know, and then he ended up dead. They refocused on Maxwell. And at that point, and that trial, by the way, was a very difficult trial because these girls, they're talking about a traumatization that they suffered when they were, it was like 15 years ago. So, I sat through that trial and I thought, boy, I at some point thought she would get off because it was a very, they were pointing to inconsistencies in the girls' testimonies. So my point in saying all this about this is I think the Justice Department thought it's good we got this conviction. Let's get out of this because we barely got this conviction. How are you going to get a conviction on someone, who is a billionaire when we barely got the girls in court to do this. They don't want to talk anymore about this. Most of them have received settlements from Epstein's estate. And look at what happened to Virginia Giuffre. I mean,
Yeah.
it ruined her life. And they don't want that. They want to move on. So I don't know how you're going to get a conviction of anybody that was connected to this beyond, Epstein and Maxwell.
Right. Now, you have pointed to whole categories of documents that are still out there. There was a settlement in the U.S. Virgin Islands involving the estate. There are FAA records. There are U.S. Marshal records. There are, the Epstein autopsy records and the rest. The various entities have really resisted releasing any of this information. Is that just a reflexive action? Do they really believe this is going to harm the victims, even if they redact the names? Why, now that he's been convicted and died and she's been convicted, haven't the authorities been willing to open up this information?
I really don't understand their thinking. They made a lot of promises uh, to a lot of people, the public, that they were going to be more transparent.
Yeah,
And I certainly believe that there is some information that they could release.
right.
The early FBI records of what they did to conduct their investigation, for example, are in the vault online, but they're heavily redacted,
Yeah,
um, including like they redacted Epstein's name. Some of that could be released. So I don't really understand why it was shut down the way it was, because there's a number of other things they could have done. For example, they could have said, look, we looked at these files and there's so much material in here that wasn't investigated thoroughly enough that we're going to look at it some more.
right.
They didn't do that. They just said, that's it, we're done, nothing to see here. So it, to me, it's not, it doesn't really make any sense.
Have you, since this latest iteration, had any conversations with any of the victims? Have they been following the recent events? And if so, what do they think about what's going on now?
Yes, I've talked to a couple of the victims, and Virginia Giuffre's family just released a statement
Yes,
um,
yes,
about, the idea that they would be trying to even talk, you know, behind closed doors with Maxwell, who Virginia has said many times was the word she used, monster.
yes,
Um, because remember, these girls trusted her. She sort of presented herself as this nurturing type person who was telling them, we're going to help your life, we're going to change it so that you're going to be able to go to college. They made all kinds of promises to these girls, and it was her that did that and then lured them into this situation where they were like, what's happening? This isn't
yeah,
what I thought I was here for.
yeah.
So these victims feel betrayed by, once again, by the DOJ and by our government officials who they believe are still covering up for wealthy and powerful men.
Absolutely. Um, Donald Trump and others have said we had no idea that he was having sex with these girls. In your mind, is that possible? Was this deliberate, ignorance? Are they lying? Was he very secretive in the way he conducted this so people wouldn't know? What is your sense of how widely known this was?
What's the phrase? The worst, best kept secret, the worst, I don't remember the
The
phrase, but
worst kept secret, yes.
worst kept secret. It was probably the worst kept secret in the social society circles in both Palm Beach and New York. Look, it wasn't just Trump who was there. There
Right.
were people in the media. There were people in science. There were tons of people that were at these events and at these parties with young girls. And trust me, they looked young. It wasn't one of those girls that you see and you think she looks like she's 20 and she's really, at 17.
Yes.
The kinds of girls that Epstein wanted looked very young. And some of the victims have told me that they were sort of ordered to kind of be in the background of these events and parties and salons that Epstein had at his residences. Uh, and look, like sort of like statues, and they weren't supposed to speak unless they were spoken to. And in some cases, he had them like, on his lap and things like that. So it was something that a lot of people had to know what was going on.
Right.
And it was way before the Me Too movement. And this is also part of the modeling world. And,
Yes.
you know, a lot of these models, it was part of their career, that there were always men that were expecting them to give them sexual favors in order to get ahead. So it was sort of part, I'm not excusing this behavior, but I'm sort of putting it in the context of, yes, people were there. They had to know, but nobody that we know of anyway spoke out. There were some people that refused to go to his house because it gave them the creeps. Uh, but for the most part, a lot of people just kind of looked the other way.
How does that work in the real world? How do so many people just tacitly, I suppose they weren't signing NDAs when they went to these parties. What was the mentality that just everyone agreed they weren't going to say anything? They saw these girls, as you say, some didn't want to even go anymore. How did this conspiracy of silence hang together for so long?
It was a lot of things. I think it was, Epstein hired, the best lawyers that his money could
Yeah.
afford. Each of those attorneys had ties to one of the or more of the prosecutors. It was a boys club, and um to some degree it still is, as much as we've come a long way with the Me Too movement. I think that rich and powerful men are still getting away with these kinds of things. I mean, every day we see something about someone somewhere, usually a GOP person,
Right.
connected person, who has been caught with, doing something to a minor. So this is hopefully we've come we're a little bit further along here, and this wouldn't happen now, but back then, uh it's just like I said, there were so many people looked the other way, the lawyers, the prosecutors, the police in Palm Beach, by the way, were the only heroes in this story. They pursued it even past the state attorney, who wouldn't, didn't want to prosecute Epstein. They pursued it even after they were, demonized by Epstein and his public relations people. So they were definitely trying to do the right thing, but they were drowned out by, a lot of people that, you know the main prosecutor in this case, Alexander Acosta. He was the top U.S. attorney in the Southern District of Florida in Miami. He wanted to become a Supreme Court justice. So for all these people, these prosecutors, you often use the U.S. Attorney's Office as a stepping stone to get better jobs, because you don't get paid much as a federal prosecutor. So they didn't want to, end the chance that they might have beyond working as a prosecutor to get a big paying job when they got out. And some of these people that Epstein was bringing in as defense attorneys, Kenneth Starr, Alan Dershowitz, Jay Lefkowitz, who was with the prominent law firm Kirkland and Ellis. I'm sure that Acosta just weighed the, pros and cons, and thought there were too many cons to prosecuting Epstein.
And he has never really faced the music in terms of getting questioned under oath or otherwise about why he made this deal. Um, in retrospect, it seems unfathomable that a prosecutor would have done this. Is there any rationale that you can think of other than this old boys club, that he could have been acting in good faith somehow? Has he ever explained his behavior there?
Well, there's been rumors. I've never seen this, but I've heard, and it's always been speculated that Epstein might have had some connection to the intelligence community.
Yes.
Uh, I've even talked to FBI agents and prosecutors about this, and they say that they heard the same thing, but we've never seen any evidence that that's true. And, one would think, especially with Trump in the crosshairs right now over this, if that was the case, they could just say that.
Right.
Look,
Right.
here's what it is. He was involved. I can't talk about it. But they're not saying that. So I don't know if I think he was friendly with people, powerful people all over the world. I don't think
Right.
that necessarily makes you into someone who is a spy, for example. So
Right,
it's hard to know whether that's true or not. I wouldn't put it past. I mean, I think it's possible, but we don't know. We just don't know.
right, right. From what we've seen in the news reporting, 1,000 or so FBI agents were set with the task of going through all this stuff and literally looking to flag Trump's name. That seems to me to be a rather big risk. That when you have 1,000 eyes or 2,000 eyes on something, the chance of this leaking out bit by bit seems to increase. And we already have some subset of that. We don't know if it was the FBI agents, we don't know if it was others, but appear in the Wall Street Journal. Are you beginning to get any information about what was seen? Do you expect to see more information about all those documents? You had a lot of people looking at them at this point.
Yeah, I mean, one would hope as a journalist, you're always hoping for
Yeah,
someone, a whistleblower, but I haven't heard of any. And I've been told that people that do have that information are reluctant to talk about it at all right now.
absolutely.
It's so
Absolutely.
explosive right now that maybe in time, they'll be more brave enough to talk to a journalist. I mean, and I get tips every day from people who know some thread. Usually it's a thread I already have explored,
Right.
but I always
Magic.
welcome and I always respond to even the strangest, craziest people.
Hmm.
But I don't know. I guess time will tell. I always said the truth might not come out. The truth will come out, but it might not come out in my lifetime or your lifetime. But the truth will probably be known at some point.
It's almost unfathomable. Last question for you. Um, the Trump administration tried to kind of direct everything to grand jury testimony. And what we found out is what we suspected, that individual witnesses don't troop into a grand jury. They have an investigator who summarizes who comes forward. Um, if Congress is really serious, and let's just assume for purposes of this conversation they are, about getting information out, who would you advise them to call as a witness? What categories of documents do you think that they should focus on that would bring light to some of this stuff? Where should they begin?
They should start with the money.
Hmm.
It's always been a mystery how he made his money. Nobody has really figured it out. And they have some records. They certainly can subpoena others. I know Senator Ron Wyden is been looking into this thread, and he is hitting some resistance from the Trump administration for getting more of these financial documents. So, this isn't hard. This is like investigation 101 that you follow
Right.
the money. And it's just shocking to me that the FBI hasn't figured out to do that. I mean, we know that the banks paid the victims
Yeah.
millions of dollars, his bank.
Yes.
So
Yes.
imagine why they felt they had to pay the victims. Imagine what kind of trail is in these financial records of Epstein. So to me that's a no-brainer to follow the money.
And in those suits, I assume that the records were sealed or they were agreed to some kind of confidentiality. Is there any entity, any bank entity, any private suit that now might go back to get that information, or is that closed off from view unless Congress subpoenas it?
I think Congress has to subpoena it or somebody has to subpoena it, like the
Wow.
FBI or the Department of Justice.
Wow.
Um, yeah, it's like, everybody says, as a journalist, why don't you follow the money? I said, well, it would be like me saying, okay, I'll look at your bank accounts. You can't just look
Go
at
in there.
Epstein's bank accounts.
Right.
So, but the government certainly has now they can follow you at every moment. There's so many techniques that they can use to find
Right.
out what you're doing at any moment. So one would think that there are certainly ways that they can explore how Epstein made his money and whether it was connected to his sex trafficking, because
Yes.
the story is that he used his businesses and his money, his idea of being a financier, which he called himself, that might have been a front for what he was really doing with these young women and girls.
Right. And last question, there are videotapes still remaining. We think, we don't know. There were allegations. We don't know whether some of this was filmed. Is that out there someplace, do you believe?
Yeah, I think the FBI had videos that they got from his safe. But as far as what kind of condition they were in, or whether they were, solid enough to go after somebody who was on them, they might have been pretty grainy. I know that the cameras that Epstein had in his house in Palm Beach from, the late 1990s, early 2000s, it isn't the kind of technology that we have today. But that said, we also have technology to kind of put those
Yes.
things together in a way that might be more comprehensible. It's hard to know, but there's definitely tapes. Hey, if nothing else, this is a child pornography case,
Yes.
and at the
Yes.
time that they were going after Epstein in 2005, I mean, they had a whole team with the Justice Department going after people who just looked at children on the computer. So here you have a guy that not only looked at it and filmed it and had sex with them, and he gets the 13-year prison, 13 month
Month,
prison,
month. Yeah.
month prison sentence, which was like a joke anyway, because he didn't have to stay in jail all day. He kind of
He picked it at night, like a hotel room. I mean, it
yeah,
was,
it was like a hotel. He was allowed to leave. His valet picked him up, took him to his office in Palm Beach during the day. He saw young women there while he was at his office. I mean, it was a joke. The jail sentence was a joke.
well, it is stunning that only now has this resurfaced. It's not like we didn't know most of this. And then suddenly it's back in the limelight because Trump apparently can't keep his mouth shut and people around him can't keep the mouth shut. So we hope the rest of this comes out. We can't thank you enough for sharing what you know and obviously for all the work you do. Contrarian friends, if it was not for Julia Brown, we would not know 90% of this. And I firmly believe there would not have been the rearrest, reinvestigation in New York if not for this reporting that really put the authorities on the spot. So thank you for what you do. And we're looking forward to the future editions, not because of some prurient interest, but because these women, these girls have still not seen anything approaching justice. So thanks so much, and we'll follow what you continue to do. So we'll see you
Thank
next
you.
time.